That's it. I don't need anybody else. I'm just going to do this all on my own. I don't need my parents. I don't need God. I don't need anybody. I'm just going to do this on my own. And let me tell you, it was the hardest decision of my life. Breaking up with them was not hard, but the life that I led since then had been so difficult because I was constantly on survival mode. I felt like I was so alone and I felt suddenly so old and I couldn't understand why. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Celeste of All podcast. In today's episode, I decided I'm going to sit and talk to you about how I decided to even start the podcast and what's been happening in my life so far. So it started way back, I guess. But if you were to ask me, I was born in this conservative Christian Indian family. And one of the things about families like that and being born in a family like that is you don't question things, right? So if your dad says, not supposed to go out at so and so time, you just asking him why shouldn't I do that itself is considered a big crime. So that's how I was raised. I wouldn't to ask a question to my teacher in class. It's scary for me. It's very intimidating. I wouldn't raise my hand and ask something to the manager at work. So asking questions is a big deal. And it takes a lot of efforts for someone like me, someone who is raised in an Indian family or Asian families struggle with to raise concerns, to question things, to ask why. So all my life, I felt that my parents just knew everything. And so I never questioned them. If they say this is what it is, I just do it. Even if I feel like that is probably wrong, I would still do things as per what they say. So, in the same way, I did get married as well, thinking that probably they knew things better than me. Probably everybody else knew things better than me, even if my gut feeling felt otherwise. And when the marriage ended up in a divorce, it really shattered my belief system. Because until then, you could say that until a certain age, your dad and your mom is God to you. So when you realize that at one point you have outgrown your earthly gods, then your life crashes down. And then you suddenly have all of this free will to you. You suddenly realize that you have all the power to now decide what you want to do. And I struggled with that because now it means that I could question everything. I could question things from my belief system. Why did I choose to be a Christian in the first place? I didn't choose this, right? Why? Why did I get married at so and so age? Why should I get married at that age in the first place? Why should I go to church? Why did I end up taking an engineering degree? Why? And I started questioning all of these things. It was like a never ending game. But the one thing did never question was God because I was afraid to question God. Instead, what I did, I completely discarded the presence and the existence of God and Jesus and the angels because I had this doubt that maybe all of this is also just a myth. Maybe none of it is true in the first place. I broke up with God. I broke up with Jesus Christ. I broke up with Mother Mary. And for someone like me who considered prayer and my Christian faith to be like the number one thing, where if something good happens, that was the first place that I go to. If something bad happens, that's the first place I go to. I go to the grotto and I light candles. If I have an exam, before the exam, I would go there, light candles, pray, and then I know that everything is going to be all right. So for someone like that to suddenly decide when I had a child and when I was going through a divorce, when I stopped talking to my parents, that's it. I don't need anybody else. I'm just going to do this all on my own. I don't need my parents. I don't need God. I don't need anybody. I'm just going to do this on my own. And let me tell you, it was the hardest decision of my life. Breaking up with them was not hard, but the life that I led since then had been so difficult because I was constantly on survival mode. I felt like I was so alone and I felt suddenly so old. And I couldn't understand why. I thought maybe it's because I put on weight, which I did. I put on 30 kgs more than what I had before I had my child. And I felt like, why am I feeling so different? So I reduced the weight. Then I try to change the way I look. I try to change the clothes that I wear. I try to upgrade my fashion. I try to look into different activities that I could go to. But no matter how much I tried to seek pleasure in, there was still something that was missing in me. There was this void in me that I could never get rid of. Until one time I had to go and write my IELTS exam. And examinations have always been this torture for me. Even in school, examinations just scare me because I do not, it's like ingrained in me. I cannot fail exams. So, because I had to write the IELTS exam, I went to church. And when I went to church, after all of those years, after 3 or 4 years or something, that's when I realized what I was missing. I broke down in church and I just cried my heart out because finally I understood what was missing in my life. I finally felt like the old me. I finally felt like a child again. I finally felt like I was home again. Until then, I was trying to be somebody I was not. I was trying to be so strong. And you can't do this thing called life alone. And the thing is, we have all of this people support around us waiting to give it to you the moment you ask them. And that was the first time after all of those years that I realized what I was missing. Then I started digging deeper into religion. And the turning point happened last year in August when I went to church. And I don't go to church that often. I don't I find a lot of comfort and peace just sitting here, down, meditating and praying on my own alone. That's where I get the most amount of peace. Going to church, I just find it like a hassle because you have to look for parking, you have to get ready, you've got to dress up, and there's children, there's noise, there's all of this stuff. So I find it difficult to concentrate and focus in church. But when I went to church last year, the priest said something. It was an Arab priest in the St. Michael's Church, Sharjah, where he was saying that he was narrating the incident of St. Thomas when Jesus Christ, after he had died and he rose up again and he appeared in front of the apostles, St. Thomas was not there. And that time, when the apostles told St. Thomas, you know what, Jesus, we saw Jesus, he came and showed himself to us. That time, St. Thomas said, I am not going to believe this till I put my fingers through his wounds. That's the only time I'm going to believe this. And the priest was saying that we often think someone who questions things to be the bad guy. But have you ever stopped to think how much courage this person needed to have to question things? So, questioning things is not a mistake because that takes courage. And then when he questioned it and when he saw Jesus Christ and put his fingers through his wounds, that's when his faith became 10 times more than anybody else over there. And that's when I realized that that is what I had been doing. I had no courage. I still went to church, I did pray, whatever, but I still had this doubt in me whether Jesus is a myth, whether God existed, whether all the things mentioned in the Bible is right or wrong. I had this thought in me, and I wouldn't say it out loud, but I would still bitch about it in the corner like these cowards. That day in the church, I decided that I'm going to ask God. I cried and I prayed in church because it's such a big deal where I'm telling God, I don't trust you, right? So I sat and I prayed and I told God, God, I'm so sorry, but I don't believe that you exist. Can you please prove yourself to me? Amen, amen, amen. And that's how I ended the prayer. And I came home that night and I was so afraid because usually people who question things, who want to know the presence of Jesus Christ or the God, they usually get like a knock in their head or something major happens. Like maybe you get like this big sickness and then God is going to prove himself by healing your sickness or something. So I was really afraid it's going to be something like that. And I was in bed that night and I heard this knock or this sound and I immediately pulled my bedsheet on top of my head and I said, Jesus Christ, God, I'm not ready today. Please come back again another time. So that night, that's what happened. I said, I'm not ready yet. Please don't show yourself to me yet. I was afraid they're going to show it themselves to me. But then they did not show themselves to me then. Okay. This was in August. What happened after that is nothing short of a miracle. Videos started popping up. There would be a YouTube video that would come up. Then there would be an Instagram reel that would pop up. Then there would be a Netflix episode that pops up. Every single time I ask a question in my head, I get the answer to it within a week or two. It would be in the form of a documentary or a reel or a book. And the first episode or the first documentary that I watched that expanded my mind was the series called the Apocalypse, I think, or the Cataclysm by Graham Hancock. And in that, he was talking about how the cataclysm that happened was real. And it's not 5,000 years old, it's 12,000 years old. And there was something called the Big Flood that actually happened 12,000 years ago. And that's when I realized, what? Noah is not a myth. Noah's ark is not a myth. There was actually a flood. That got me curious. And I went back to reading the Bible. I went back to read Genesis. And I was like, oh my God, it is said that the water rose a certain level. Like, it's clearly mentioned how high the water was, how many days the water was on the planet, how long it was, what he did. It was so clearly mentioned. And even in the Graham Hancock's documentary, too, it was so clear that it was actually this massive flood that covered the entire planet and killed a whole lot of beings. And this was 12,000 years ago. Until then, I thought that we are just 5,000 years old, and our human race started by us just being really dumb people, just still rubbing stones together and killing these rabbits, and that's how we started. But that's not what it was. When I saw that episode, I realized that, oh my God, all of the history that I know, there's a high possibility that this could be wrong. We may not have been as dumb as we think we were. So that expanded my brain. That put this big question mark in my head. Then the next thing that happened was I, for some reason, decided to meet with my cousin sister, whom we have known for a long time, but we never contacted. I met with her. We went to a restaurant and we started speaking about things. And then she told me about past life regressions. And what past life regression does is when you are put under deep hypnosis and you are made to remember your past lives, your previous incarnations on the planet. Maybe it would be on planet Earth, maybe it would be on another planet. And you come up with facts about how you died in a previous birth, what happened to you, what were the lessons you learned, why did you reincarnate at this time, what is your mission, what's your purpose, and so on. And I started reading about it. She sent me Many Lives, Many Masters. There's a book which was amazing. Then I started watching. I binge watched a lot of past life regressions that you can see on YouTube. And it was so real because the people, when they're narrating the incidents that they remember from their memory, they're going through extreme pain, they're going through stress, they're crying, they're shaking, they're shivering. That means they actually believed it and it's real. It's not just some dream that they're making up. And that made me realize that, oh my God, we are not here for this one life. My entire belief system that I'm here for this one life and then I'm going to die and I'm going to wait in a dark place for the final judgment, that is false. I probably had many lives before this, and I might probably continue to have many more lives in the future as well. What if I'm an eternal being? What if a spiritual eternal being who's going to just keep reincarnating or having these many lives over and over and over again? What is then my purpose in life? What that did to me was when I realized that we have multiple lives and this is not the only life, it gave me courage. Because until then, when you think that this is the only life you have, then you want to make sure that this is done right. So you avoid taking risks. Until then, I wanted to just like I was so disappointed that I had this one life and I messed it up because I became a divorcee, I became a single mom. So now it's like I messed up this one life I had. But when I realized that this is just one of the many, many millions of lives I had, I realized that, oh, is that so? That means I can take risks. Then maybe I could question everything. I could have a completely new belief system. I could do whatever I want. I could go try out different things. I avoided going to bars or drinking because I felt like this is the only life and something bad's going to happen. But then I decided, you know what, let me go try it out. So I did go and I did all the things that I wanted to do, which was try out different drinks, all the crazy stuff that I wanted to get out of my system. And I did. And once I got all of that out of my system, I realized that material things, anything that's materialistic, brands, none of that gave me the same kind of pleasure or peace or contentment the way knowing the presence of God gave me. So I started questioning about God and Jesus. And the reason why God and Jesus comes to me is because I was raised in Christian faith. For you, it could be different, right? Maybe you are a Muslim, maybe you are a Hindu or Buddhist. Whatever your belief is, we start by questioning the things that we were raised in. So for me, it was this. But at the same time, my questioning did not end in Christianity. I also started reading the Quran. One of my followers sent me the Quran to me, and that's the first time when I read the book I realized that wow, a lot of the things mentioned in the Quran is same as the things mentioned in the Bible. So that was also another revelation to me where I realized that okay, so me and them having these arguments and these disagreements is completely stupid, because we are at the end of the day talking about the same presence, the same God. So for me to think that, like, until then, because I was raised here, anyone who's wearing an abaya, or they scare me. Like, I'll be honest with you, if women or men wearing in the Muslim, the Islam, I mean, the Arab costumes would intimidate me, or I don't know if it's intimidation. I think it's just general for them, right? They're also afraid of their faith, because if you question it, then you will get shamed. And I know how things are for them, it's very strict. So when I realized, when I started reading about it and I started understanding it, I had the courage finally to question things to them and have discussions with them. And then I started talking to the Muslims about what I'm reading, and then I'm telling them, hey, this is what it says. Why do you say that? This makes sense. So I started having the courage to question things to them about their religion. And then it just went on from there. And then what happened is I started listening to a lot of these channelers who comes on Next Level Soul podcast. And in Next Level Soul podcast, they started talking about near death experiences, them channeling these beings. And the more I heard about it, the more I watched it and listened to these podcasts, suddenly I got this intense desire around October, November, where I felt like I wanted to channel. I also wanted to be able to hear the entities. I want to be able to hear God. I want to be able to hear Jesus. I want to be able to hear the other entities, the extraterrestrials. I want to get information from them too. Like, I wanted to do that. So that became my sudden intense desire. And because of that desire, I started looking into how to start channeling. I bought this course by Lee Harris Energy. And there's a course which is just $33 where you can buy one that teaches you how to start channeling. So I bought the course and I started to also change my diet accordingly. I started to have more liquids. I started to do water fast. I drank a lot of coconut water. I started to reduce my meat intake. I still love it, but I started to reduce it, and I started to practice automatic writing slash channeling, where every day in the morning I would spend 10 minutes listening to the music that is there in the course and then just writing down whatever comes to my head, right? And one of the things I realized while doing that, after I've been doing it for, 3, 4, 5 months, and now recently when I looked back and I started reading it, the messages that I read while I'm channeling is so different from the way I was journaling 4 years ago. 4 years ago, when I checked my journals, the kind of way in which I talk to myself is, you need to have $100,000 by the end of this year. You need to start this business within this year. You've got to have these many followers by this year. This is what you need to do. You've got to do that. Like, I was constantly being so hard on myself. You have to lose weight. You've got to work out. Versus now, when I read the kind of messages that I was writing to myself, it was like, I'm asking. So in channeling, you ask the question and you write the answer when you're in after meditation and you're sitting in peace. So I ask, am I doing enough? And then the answer that I write is, my love, you're doing more than enough. Take it easy. You're doing everything that you can. This is enough. So the way I talk to myself started changing once I started channeling. I started being so much more loving to myself, so much more considerate and forgiving to myself. And when you love yourself that way, when you're compassionate towards yourself, that's when you start being compassionate towards the people around you. Until then, if someone else tells me that they are afraid or they do not know how to do and we feel so helpless, I get irritated. I get pissed off. Because why? Because for me, that form of weakness, when I feel that, I hate it on myself. I hate feeling weak. So when someone else expresses that to me, I hate it. I lash out. But once I started being compassionate towards myself, when someone says that, I realized that it is not easy to stay strong all this time, and it is okay to go through these feelings of weakness, through to go through these feelings of helplessness. And I was able to start being compassionate towards them in the same way I was able to start being compassionate towards myself. I started forgiving myself when I am not as productive as I used to be, when I want to take a break, when I want to sleep a little longer. I started being more compassionate towards myself and a lot more loving. Then what happened is, in February, around Feb of this year, while channeling, I started writing things like, start a podcast, start a podcast, start a podcast. I'm like, why? Because I was getting really happy about my Instagram account where I was a lifestyle blogger. I was getting brand collaborations. I was getting invited to events, getting paid, getting free products. And all I had to do was just put on makeup and talk about it on my Instagram. And I was gaining followers as well. So suddenly, for me to start writing, to start a podcast, I just couldn't understand why. And that too, not just a normal podcast, a spirituality podcast where I'm talking about all of these things that I'm talking about right now in this podcast. At the same time, I also wanted to tell people about how my reality has changed, about how I started believing in extraterrestrials and that it is possible to hear God and listen to all of the beings that we speak about. But I did start the podcast, and at that time I had no idea how I was going to get guests because I never have podcasts. I only had 1,000 followers on 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. On my Instagram account, also, I don't speak about spirituality. It's just lifestyle and superficial, materialistic things. So why would anybody say yes to me? But I started contacting people, and they started saying yes to me, and I'm like, what? Why would you say yes to me? Because I was waiting for them to ask me to send my analytics or my insights and to show them why, to convince them. No, I messaged them saying that I want to talk about spirituality in Middle East, and they would just say yes. I got the biggest guest who I am a big fan of, Marina Jacobi. She's such a huge star, and she said yes to me. I told her, I'm so honored to have you on my podcast. And she responded saying, I'm honored to be speaking to you. Like, what a beautiful soul. And I loved it. I have no idea even now how the guests are saying yes to me. All I know is that this is not my plan and I'm being divinely guided by the celestial beings. I know that for a fact. One of the things that happened during me trying to contact these podcast guests is I happened to make a friend. Her name is Hadil. She changed my life completely. I had been feeling really scared about speaking to channelers because it's like, oh my God, what if these channelers can see through me, see all of my past sins and the mistakes I've done, or predict my future? Like, they're, to me, they were magical creatures and that they had superpowers, and I'm just like some mortal being that you see on Harry Potter series, right? So it was scary for me until I started speaking to Hadil. Hadil and I became like such good friends because she was just someone who was speaking like me, just outspoken and just funny and hilarious. And then talking about, oh my God, dude, I just got my awakening. I can start hearing Jesus. I can hear God. I can hear the angels and all of that. I'm like, I found it funny and I found it intriguing. Her story was super duper intriguing. I started asking her questions and she started telling me things. And we decided to talk on the phone. And I called her in March, end of March or something. I got on the phone with her and she said, I'm going to do a reading for you. And I said, okay, sure. And she started doing a reading for me. And it was supposed to be a half an hour call, but I was on call with her for 2 hours. I went to the park right there, and it started with her telling me that she narrated my life back to me. She said that I had a very loving family. I grew up in a loving family, but I always felt different. I always felt different from the rest of my sisters and my family, and that I went through a difficult time in my 20s, and that they have seen my tears and all of that. And and I'm like, and when she said that they have seen my tears, I thought to myself, tears? Did I even cry enough? I didn't even cry enough. What tears? They have seen me struggle and go through pain. And then along the way, at some point in time, Jesus came through and Jesus started speaking to me through her. And the moment it was Jesus, oh my God, I couldn't believe myself. I just went on the floor. I was like on the floor of the park with the phone, and like I just burst into tears and I started saying, I'm sorry, Jesus, I'm sorry, Jesus, I'm sorry, Jesus. And I just felt so guilty and so bad that I even questioned the existence of Jesus in the first place. And Jesus came and told that, child, I've always been watching you. I love your prayers, but I love the prayers you prayed as a child. Those were my favorite. And I am like, what? I just heard that, and I just became numb. I didn't know what was happening. And the next few days I was still thinking about that message, and I realized that, oh my God, that was Jesus. Because you know what? When I was a child, I used to pray for world peace to Jesus Christ. I would pray like Michael Jackson, heal the world, stop the wars, and all of that. That's the kind of prayers that I used to have as a child. And then somewhere along the line, I stopped praying to Jesus Christ and I started praying to Mother Mary instead. And I never prayed to God ever. I don't know why. I think I just felt like probably I was not good enough to pray to God. But Mother Mary became my favorite, and I just started praying to her. So that means Jesus was listening to my prayers. That blew my mind away. Then another time, Jesus came and said that I think I was going through a major confusion, right? I was thinking about what should I be doing. I was thinking that more and more I started, yeah. Then what happened was I was really afraid of asking more questions. I wanted to ask Jesus Christ a lot more questions. I wanted to tell him that, um, Jesus, did you actually get crucified? Did you actually come down? Did you actually die for us? Why did you die for us? So I had all of these questions, and I was like, oh my God, how can I even ask this to Jesus, right? And then Jesus came through Hadil and he said, child, ask the questions that torment your heart. Do not be afraid. Ask them. Oh, that was the permission that I needed. And then he said that every time you are on a podcast interviewing people, I'm going to be right next to you, guiding you, ask the right questions. I'm going to be with you every single time. And bro, seriously, come on. Hadil doesn't know what I pray for, right? And at that point of time, my prayers were all to do with the podcast. Please, God, help me ask the right questions so that I can guide the people who listen to my podcast in the right way, and they can get rid of the fear and the anxiety that they have and get their trust back in you. How would Hadil know what my prayer was? And Jesus told this to me. And that gave me the license to ask questions. Then I started asking Jesus every kind of question that I had. Jesus, weren't you afraid? Why do people lie about you being married? You were married, you had kids, right? And he said, yes, I did. So I started asking questions, and he would answer every single question that I had. Everything. And this just, it's like, you know, the kind of feeling that you have when you start hearing Jesus Christ or when you start hearing your gods is that you finally realize there is absolutely nothing that you want ever in this world when you know God is with you, right? I mean, what more do you want? Really, what more? What do you want? Like, my mom asked me, don't you want to get married again? I'm like, why? Why would I want to? What am I lacking? I mean, seriously, Jesus promised me that He's going to take care of me and my family. Why would I want anyone else? It's the biggest flex that you can have. And every time I speak about it, people get afraid, right? The questions that they ask is, why would Jesus speak to someone like Hadil? Hadil is not special. Why would Jesus do that? Why would God do that? God is not jobless. Jesus is not jobless. But you know what? This is the exact questions that I had too. Why? But let me ask you otherwise. Why wouldn't God do that? Aren't you just as special? We think we are not special. We think we are not worthy of it. But God made us in this perfect creation of Himself, like wholly perfect, wholly lovable, wholly loving. We are the ones who had all of these false beliefs, thinking that we are not worthy of God speaking to us. We are not worthy of His love. No, He created each of us equally. He doesn't have any discrimination against anybody. We are all equal in front of eyes. He loves us all so deeply, and it hurts him to know that we are in tears. The second time, these last 2 weeks, I had been going through a very difficult time. Let's call it like an ego death or whatever, purging, right? And I was in so much pain. I was crying so much. And usually, what happens is I would just cry in silence. You know how it is in Indian communities, right? Or in whatever, I guess, in this Middle East. We don't cry out, we cry in silence. And then we comfort ourselves in silence. We find the solution to the problem alone, and we just deal with it alone. But this time, when I was crying so much, Hadil came in a she sent me a message saying, hey, Jesus just came through and asked me to send this channeled message to you. uh, and Jesus, and I was praying to Jesus, telling me, Jesus, please show me the right way, show me what to do. And Jesus comes through and says, child, you're overwhelming yourself for no reason. You are stepping into your power. You are the light that shines in darkness, and now you are stepping into that light. Your fear of doing the right thing It doesn't have to be. There's no way you're going to do anything wrong. Just your kindness and compassion is more than enough. And the reason why this is like a big deal is because I was going through a time where I felt bad that I was not able to convince people to become more spiritual instead of religious. And I felt like it was my responsibility to change the world. And this is a huge responsibility for these tiny shoulders to hold, right? I can't change the world. Jesus came through, he died for us, and still there's still people who are, just because someone is religious doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about. Spirituality is completely different. Probably I don't even know what spirituality is, right? Let's not even call it anything. Knowing God is different from just praying to Him or doing these rituals, going to church 100 times, going and confessing your sins 100 times. Knowing God intimately is completely different. And that is why I decided that, you know, I need to share my story. I do not need to try to convince anyone. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to hide my beliefs behind this podcast by bringing guests who would speak instead of me. And there's no way I can go back. I was trying to just go back to feeling normal again and then talk about materialistic things again or superficial things, but that's just not going to happen. This is my reality. Now God speaks to me, Jesus speaks to me. Every time I'm going through pain, every time I pray, just a sentence, a message from them, that's enough. And I know they're with me. And I hope and I wish every single one of you gets to hear God. And the one and only reason why we are not able to hear God is because we believe that we are not worthy of it. We believe that God will not speak to us because we are a sinner. The only time God would be able to come and speak to us, or the archangels, or your whoever you pray to, the ascended masters, they can come through only if you ask them for help. Only if you tell them, Krishna, I want you to speak to me. Please reveal yourself to me. Please help me out here. That's the only time they will go and show themselves to us. I hope the story inspires you to ask questions, to ask for help. They love us unconditionally to the point that they have allowed. God loves us unconditionally to the point that God allows us to believe that we are not unconditionally loved. That's how unconditionally loved we are. We need to forgive ourselves for the mistakes and the errors we have done. We need to forgive ourselves for thinking whatever we think we have done and believing that we need to struggle more. No, none of us needs to struggle. We do not have to suffer. We can choose abundance every single time. We do not have to shed even one drop of tear because our Father doesn't want that to happen. And we have to love ourselves just as much as God loves us because we deserve it and we are perfectly created in His image. I'm going to continue bringing beautiful guests on the podcast to talk about it. And I hope my story has inspired you to question things and to seek God's help and to have the courage to be authentic and speak up. Thank you so much for listening. I'll speak to you again in the next episode. Bye.